The rain wasn't falling so much as it was being thrown, hard and angry, against the grimy windows of the Lone Wolf Bar and Grill. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of wet leather, cheap beer, and a quiet understanding. This was a place for men who wanted to be left alone, and the rule was respected. At a large round table in the corner, a man they called Grizz nursed a whiskey. His real name was forgotten, buried under years of road dust, and a past he never discussed. His cut, the leather vest worn by his club, bore the emblem of a snarling wolf's head, a testament to a loyalty forged in fire and chrome. The piece was a fragile thing, a bubble in a world that often tried to pop it. And pop it did, with the frantic, desperate squeak of the saloon-style doors. A small figure, drenched and shivering, stumbled into the bar. It was a boy, no more than 6, his face a mess of rain and tears. His small sneakers slipped on the sawdust-strewn floor as his terrified eyes scanned the room, landing on the table of bikers. They were the biggest, the most intimidating, and in his child's logic, they were his only hope. He ran straight for Grizz, his little hands clutching at the man's reins. Battered leather pants. The entire bar fell silent, the only sound the hiss of the rain and the boy's ragged sobs. "Please, mister," the boy choked out, his voice trembling with a fear that was too old for his years. "You gotta help. They're beating my mama. In our house. They're hurting her real bad." Grizz looked down at the boy. His own face, usually a mask of granite, softened at the edges. He saw the pure, unadulterated terror in the child's eyes, a look he remembered from a long time ago, in another life. He knelt down, his large, calloused hands gently holding the boy's small, shaking shoulders. "Who's hurting your mama, son?" Grizz's voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. Her boyfriend Mark. The boy stammered, and his friend. They came home and started yelling. Then they started hitting her. I heard her crying. She told me to run to get help. Grizz didn't hesitate. He didn't call the police. He didn't form a committee. He looked at the men at his table joker, a man with a quick smile but dead eyes, Ox, a mountain of a man who rarely spoke, and a few others. A single, almost imperceptible nod passed between them. It was a language they all understood. "Show us," Grizz said, his voice leaving no room for argument. The boy led them out into the storm, a tiny, drenched guide for a pack of grim-faced men on rumbling motorcycles. The roar of the engines was a promise of vengeance, cutting through the quiet, suburban street where neat lawns and picket fences hid ugly secrets. They pulled up to a small, modest house. Even from the street, they could hear the raised, slurred voices and the sound of something breaking. Grizz told the boy to stay with Joker on the porch, sheltered from the rain. The child clung to Joker's leg, his small body still trembling. Grizz didn't knock. He turned the handle. It was unlocked. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, his massive frame filling the doorway. Ox and the others filed in behind him, a wall of leather and silent intent. The scene in the living room was one of domestic violation. A lamp was shattered on the floor. A picture of the boy and his mother lay with its glass cracked, and in the center of it all, a woman was cowering on the sofa, her face bruised and bleeding, her eyes wide with a fresh wave of terror as the new, more formidable threat entered her home. 2 men stood over her. One, presumably Mark, was a lanky, weasel-faced man holding a beer bottle. The other was bigger, beefier, with a smug, drunken confidence. "Who the hell are you?" Mark slurred, taking a threatening step forward. Grizz's eyes swept over the woman's bruised face, then back to the 2 men. There was no anger in his expression, not yet. It was something colder, more calculating, a predator's calm. "The boy," Grizz said, his voice dangerously quiet. "He came to us. He was crying." Mark laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "The little snitch. That's none of your business, Grandpa. This is a family matter. Now get out of my house before you get hurt." The word family seemed to hang in the air, a bitter irony. Grizz took a slow step forward. The floorboard creaked under his weight. "You're right about one thing," Grizz said. "It is about family. That boy out there thinks his mama is his whole world, and you broke his world." The bigger friend decided to play the hero. He puffed out his chest. "You think your little biker gang scares us." In a movement too fast to follow, Ox moved. He didn't throw a punch. He simply grabbed the man by the front of his shirt and the belt, lifted him off the ground as if he were a child's toy, and hurled him through the screen of the large television. There was a crash of glass and a shower of sparks. The man lay groaning among the wreckage. Mark's bravado evaporated. The beer bottle slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. He backed away, his eyes darting towards the kitchen, looking for an escape. There was none. Grizz closed the distance. This wasn't a bar fight. It wasn't a brawl. It was a lesson. A brutal, unforgiving lesson in consequences. He didn't say a word as he backhanded Mark, sending the man spinning into the wall. When Mark tried to push himself up, Grizz's boot connected with his ribs. The crack was sickeningly loud. The other bikers formed a loose circle, not to join in, but to ensure the lesson was delivered without interruption. They were the audience and the jury. Grizz hauled Mark to his feet. "You hit a woman," he growled, his voice finally showing the heat of his fury. "You terrorized a child." A fist to the gut drove the air from Mark's lungs. "You don't get to do that." The revenge was methodical, precise, and yes, brutal. It was the physical manifestation of the little boy's tears. With every blow, Grizz was wiping away a bruise from the mother's face, silencing a scream the boy had heard. It was raw, primal justice, the kind that exists outside of law books and courtrooms. When it was over, Mark and his friend were lying broken amidst the ruins of the living room, moaning in pain. They were conscious, but they would remember this night for the rest of their lives. They would remember the cold, hard eyes of the bikers and the price of their cruelty. Grizz walked over to the mother, who was still on the sofa, staring in stunned silence. He knelt before her again, just as he had with her son. His knuckles were raw and bleeding. "Ma'am," he said, his voice returning to that low, rumbling calm. "The police are on their way. We called them before we came in. You tell them the truth. You tell them everything. We'll be outside to give our statement." He stood and led his men out onto the porch. The rain had softened to a drizzle. The boy looked up at Grizz, his eyes no longer filled with terror, but with a quiet awe. He didn't say anything. He just reached out and took Grizz's large, bloodied hand in his small one. When the police cars arrived, their lights painting the wet street in flashes of blue and red, the officers were met with a surreal scene. A group of rough-looking bikers stood guard on the porch of a battered house, sheltering a mother and her child from the rain. Inside, two men whimpered on the floor. The mother told her story. The bikers gave their statements. The police, after surveying the scene and hearing the account, asked few questions. It was clear what had happened. Sometimes justice arrives in a patrol car, and sometimes it arrives on a Harley. As Grizz and his men prepared to leave, the little boy ran up to him one last time. He wrapped his small arms around Grizz's leg in a tight hug. "Thank you," the boy whispered. Grizz placed a heavy hand on the boy's head, a gesture of profound gentleness from a man of brutal strength. He looked at the mother, who mouthed the same words, her eyes full of a gratitude that went beyond words. The bikers mounted their machines, the engines roared to life, but this time the sound wasn't a promise of vengeance, it was a declaration. A declaration that even in the darkest of places, in the hearts of men who lived on the fringes, there burned a fierce, unyielding light of kindness for those who couldn't defend themselves. They rode away, not as villains, but as the unlikely guardians of a small, broken family, leaving behind a quiet street and the beginning of a healing peace.